Welcome to Moonlight Madness, a podcast recorded entirely from my parents' basement because I'm a 19-year-old who has yet to move out for university. I'll be your host for this bountiful evening. I am known as the Moonlight Madman, and welcome to Moonlight Madness. In light of recent events, we are soon to be getting out of this quarantine situation, so to speak. There are places in the mainland of Great Britannia that are already trying to figure out a plan for their leave. Whereas the 28th of May is fastly approaching for us in my province. Also, in light of recent news events, I have recently hit 2.5k subscribers on YouTube. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed to my channel. And may the Moonlight Madman bring you more and more entertainment. If you enjoy these podcasts, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. The Moonlight Madman is not sponsored, nor is his show sponsored. In today's podcast, you will meet a lovely young lady known as the LovelyLina. She is a young practitioner of the Wicca faith. And if you missed the previous episode, I will leave it down in the link in the description. The previous episode goes more in depth about Gardnerian witchcraft as an interview with a practitioner of Gardnerian witchcraft known as Hellbound Heathen on YouTube. If you haven't already, go subscribe to his account. I understand that the Moonlight Madness podcast is not usually what I do on my YouTube channel. However, I thought it was time for a nice little bit of a change. Talk about more things that are, stuff that I am heavily interested in. Therefore, Moonlight Madness is a thing that I will do every Monday. Today's episode is going to be a little bit of a general episode, mostly focusing on things like the Norse Myths, with, of course, my friend, the LovelyLina. Welcome everyone back to Moonlight Madness, episode 3. I am here with the LovelyLina, and would you like to introduce yourself, Lina, to my audience about Moonlight Madness and what you practice and so on and so on.
Okay. Hello there, lovely ladies and gentlemen, and everybody in between. My name is LovelyLina, and I have been into Wicca since I was 12 or 13 years old, thanks to my auntie, and I've also been practicing Wicca for like a very long time. However, since I haven't been practicing it, but I've been following about what Wicca has been teaching people and other things, I decided that I should possibly watch a lot of videos about it. That way I could demonstrate them, like whether on my own or even with a couple of friends. And I'm also a Norse pagan, which means that I follow anything that is considered Norse, whether it's Thor or Odin or Ragnarok or etc. And my guardian gods are Skadi, Freya, and Thor.
Ah, you got the lovely Freya on your protection gods.
And my guardian spirit animal is Lunar, the wolf.
Really?
Yes.
Why don't you tell us a bit about Skadi? Is she the first goddess that you ever followed, or what's the deal with that? Because a lot of people know who Thor, and potentially know a bit about Freya as well. People know Thor as Mighty Hammer Boy.
I was about to say that my auntie, when she got me into Wicca, she actually prays to Thor to protect me. And Thor has been protecting me all my life, from depression to anxiety and moments of suicidal thoughts.
Wow, that seems real. That went dark there for a second. But I was asking about Scotty rather than Thor because, as I said, a lot of people do know
Oh,
who
she's the
Thor
second
is.
goddess to protect me.
Yeah,
And
did you find Scotty or did Scotty find you?
I found Scotty during a winter storm.
Really?
Hmm.
So why don't you go
And
to a bit more detail about who Scotty is to you?
Scotty is the goddess of winter, snow, and ice.
Mm,
And she is also the goddess of hunting and skiing.
really?
Hmm.
So I guess hunters better worship her than to get a good hunt.
Hmm.
Yeah, see, I also practice a bit of Norse stuff. I've been very fond of the Norse mythology ever since I was a child. And I started practicing. I called myself a Norse pagan back in 2018. I don't really have a label anymore, but I still believe in the Norse gods. But I believe all gods sort of exist. Like all gods exist inside of us, and we exist as them. Sometimes people actually think that the gods themselves are mankind's ego, but put into a godlike form. Sometimes I disagree with, other times not so much, because you do have very egotistical gods out there. Like,
Yeah, like Loki, for example.
well, Loki's not really egotistical, he's more of a trickster. Egotistical would be more like, I'm sorry to say this, Odin himself, because he gives himself the title of the All-Father, and, you know,
Hmm.
rather than the common Marvel depiction of how Odin is this mighty, powerful god who loves everything, he treats people with compassion and respect.
Hmm.
Odin can be a bit of a dick to people as well. the
Well, I do love the Marvel movies, but they do kind of have a bad depiction on like the Norse gods and goddesses.
I mean, it gets their names out there, sure, but then there's that also goes to say the nine worlds are connected by the Yggdrasil, and a lot of people don't realize that, you see, the popular gods in the Norse mythology that people worship are, of course, Loki, Odin, Thor, Frigg, Freya, basically the main gods out there, which are separated between Aesir and Vanir. The Vanir are an ancient group of gods that were, some people believe one Germanic tribe worshipped them, whereas the others worshipped the Aesir, thus bringing into the mythology the Aesir-Vanir War and making peace with one another and integrating each other's cultures together. But the Vanir are meant to be very peaceful kind of people. You still wouldn't want to mess with them, but they are meant to be very bit more peaceful. They're a bit more loving. They're nature gods, you see. They're gods of fertility. They uh, help with the harvest and help you with your your own fertility and so on and so on. Like, you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And then, of course, on Yggdrasil, there's also at the bottom of Yggdrasil is the mighty Nidhogg, or if I'm going to go true Old Norse on it, the way you pronounce Nidhogg's name is Nithug. Nithugd. Yeah, Nithug. And
Yeah, Nithog, he is also the bloodsucker of
oh, Nithug's
murderers, perjurers, and adulterers.
Nithug is not a guy. Nithug's a girl. Anyway,
Oh,
Nithug is Nithug bites at the world tree, and people assume that Nithug is evil for that reason. But the honest truth is, Nithug is biting at the world tree, like biting at the decay of the world tree, trying to keep it, alive, trying to keep the decay away from it, to keep the worlds together. In fact, Nithug actually does have a general rule of recycling. Basically, basically the three R's, but spiritual: reduce, reuse, recycle. If you can recycle something, give it a new purpose, then do it. If you can't, put it into the refuse pile and use that to feed the earth once more, to keep animals alive, keep the crops alive, and so on and so on.
Mhm.
And yeah, what else do you kind of do in your everyday practices? Because some people practice witchcraft or the Wicca faith or even paganism quite differently. In fact, there are people out there that practice the Egyptian system of paganism. They're called the Kemetics.
Me, whenever it's thundering or raining out, I sometimes wear my clear quartz necklace and I start meditating to the point where um my astral projection goes straight up to anywhere in the nine world. Though the only place I sometimes go is Asgard.
Hmm. How exactly do you do your astral projections? Because there are a different variety of techniques out there that people do for astral projection.
Well, it's simple. I still wear my clear quartz necklace, and sometimes my clear quartz necklace can make my astral projection go faster.
Hmm. But
And I keep my head down while meditating, and I still do crisscross applesauce, sitting position, and um, my astral projection can go like anywhere in the world.
yeah. Now, do you practice any kind of energy systems? Like, there are people who have the chakra system, and then there are people who practice the Greek system to be more like to practice more of a European kind of system of magic and a European system of energy work. Do you?
um, hmm. I only know like energy systems, but not a lot of it.
Hmm.
Like the only couple that I know is like the dream energy system, the astral projection energy system, um and the spiritual energy system of life when you're outdoors.
Well, what I meant by energy system was like there are people out there who practice chakras and use chakras in their meditations, whereas there are also people out there who use a similar system but follow something known as the Greek system of energy work.
Well, what about like gems and rocks energy system?
Well, I don't really know that much about gems and rock stuff because that's not exactly my practice. You can go into detail about that if you wish, because I mean, we got about an hour or two to kick out for this podcast.
Okay.
Oh shit!
So the only gems and rocks that I know is that sapphire, it means confidence, it means self-esteem, it means loyalty, and it also means honesty.
Mm.
And rose quartz means self-love or even love, but there are other times where rose quartz actually means sex.
Oh, okay, that escalates quickly. But I mean, at the same time, romance, sex, kind of intertwines with each other sometimes. Some people don't,
Hmm.
but again, some people don't necessarily know the difference between being in a sexual relationship and being in a loving relationship. Because there are people out there, especially young teenagers, who think just because someone wants to have sex with you that they're in love with you and that you should be in love with them. But it's
Hmm.
a lot more complicated than that. And we're getting a little bit more off topic here. Are there any? Are there any? Is there anything that you would like to tell the audience about general practices or philosophies that you might follow?
Hmm. What I also know is that hmm. What I also know is that people make a lot of altars while praising their god, and it doesn't even matter what kind of altar it is, like whether it's a big altar or a small altar. Though there are other times that whenever people make huge big altars of like Thor, Loki, or any other gods and goddesses, their energy um can actually grow stronger. same with their gods.
Mm.
So it's kind of like energy transparenting.
Yeah. Do you have any stories to tell the audience about, you know, your experiences with Thor or the Norse gods in general?
Hmm. So there was one time back in like um middle school. Um I was texting my auntie about winter, and I was feeling bored, and I really wanted to have like a winter storm because, I always adore winter. Winter is one of my favorite seasons. And then um my auntie started to my auntie started to like recommend me to do like some winter spell, and I thought it was a great idea. So what I did is I cut up some paper snowflakes, placed them onto the windows, and I also used like four white candles on each window. And I started to say the snow spell like 3 to 5 times.
Interesting.
And my dad heard me shouting from downstairs, and as he saw me doing like some winter ritual, my dad is like, "What are you doing?" And then I said, "I'm trying to do a winter ritual. What do you think I'm doing?"
Praising Satan.
Well, no, my dad isn't like a priest. He's not a Christian or anything. My dad is part pagan and part Buddhist. Um, my mom used to be Catholic, but nowadays she's a Unitarian Universalist.
Unitarian Universalist. I've never heard of that term, and I'm a theology student. What exactly is a universal Unitarian?
Uh, a Unitarian Universalist is actually a liberal religion, which is which is characterized by a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. What that also means is that you're practicing any kind of like religion, whether it's Buddhism or Christianity or any other religion.
You see, when I think of Unitarianism, I think of a. There is actually a sect in Christianity called the Unitarian sect, which seeks out to join all the sects together, so to speak, you know, be open to everyone. Whereas, you know, when I used to be a
Mm-hmm.
Christian, I practiced non-denominationalism, where you don't really identify with a set denomination, because in my eyes, identifying with a denomination kind of links back to an idea of tribalism, so to speak. If you're not this denomination, then you're going to hell and shit like that. Because there are people out there like that. I've met in my own journey. I've met people who have told me, if you don't follow this particular sect of Christianity, then it's wrong and sinful. And that's not why I left. I left of my own accord. I just felt it wasn't right for me.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing against religion. I have nothing against the religion itself. And in fact, one day I actually do want to get someone on this podcast who is either, you know, a Christian or, like me, someone who will defend the Christian faith, so we can actually, you know, open up and talk about the Christian faith. Because, you know, Christianity does get a bad rep in the West. People always say, if you're a Christian, you're an evil piece of shit who hates everyone. You hate gays. You hate everyone like that. But in truth, it's a very minuscule amount. You know, and
Yeah.
they have a right to practice that kind of sect.
Well,
If you go in and like act as if they are your enemy, and you start mistreating them for, you know, having a different belief that you don't have, then they're going to come right back at you with more and more hate. You're going to
mm-hmm.
stock the flames of hatred into their hearts. They're going to say, "See, I was right. I was right about them. I was so right about them." Whereas if you open up to them and have a conversation with them, they will, they might not change their beliefs, but they'll have a better understanding of who you are and what your beliefs are, and probably learn to respect you a bit more.
Yeah, and another thing is that in the Northeast,
Northeast
that is
where?
not what Christianity is in my country, because in my country of the Northeast, they knew that it's wrong to judge a person by their sexuality, race, or whatever, and there is actually a sin in the Bible called judgment, um and uh and another thing is that um they believe that if you judge someone because of who they are or what they are, then you're gonna go to hell.
Mm. Well, ideally, like in the Christian church, it's the big G who controls whether someone goes to heaven or hell. So it does get me a bit frustrated when people go on and say you're going to hell for what you believe in, because you're supposed to represent the church, you're supposed to represent the community, and you know you don't get to have a say in who goes to heaven or hell. If the Christian God is the one true God as they believe, he has the right to determine who goes to heaven or who goes to hell. Doesn't matter if they're not a Christian or if they don't practice the faith. You have to let them be them. Let them have their own choice. That's what free will is.
Well, I am actually going to quote on what the Bible said about judgment. To resolve conflicts, stop judging others, and submit to God's authoritative word.
And yeah. See, another thing is the Christian God is actually also incorporated into some of the Norse systems as well. In fact, there are there's a book called the Galdrabok, which is a system of runic magic, which actually does reference Christian entities like Beelzebub, Satan, and all those kinds of things, and they don't portray them in a bad light. The word Satan just means adversary, so anything can be a Satan. I don't particularly believe that the Christian idea of Satan is truly an entity, so to speak. People say Satan is the ruler of hell, but in truth, Satan is the adversary. So if someone is going up against you and harassing you and saying your views are wrong, evil, and destructive, they by all means are Satan. They are your adversary.
And they also claim that they are their disciples or their prophets.
Mm. So is there anything more in particular that you'd want to focus on in this podcast? Because I'm just kind of making a bunch of general points here. This was kind of an unplanned one as well. I didn't really think of that much of a plan. I was gonna do a review of the Joker movie, but some things just kind of get set in motion. Is there anything that you'd want to focus on in particular, Lena?
To be honest, I haven't seen the Joker movie, but I have seen clips of it.
No. I wasn't saying let's talk about the Joker. I was saying is there any points that you want to make in this podcast that we haven't said yet?
Oh yeah, what I have heard is that children with special needs are actually getting interested into spirituality, much like me, and I do have advice for parents who have special needs children. If your child is participating in a a Christian or pagan or any other religion, you need to tell them to be careful on how much praise you're given to the religion, and you need to be careful on how much you're practicing the religion. Because if you do like the huge steps of it, like more than once, then it could be more stressful and it could cause your child to have anxiety or any other side effects.
Mm. So, do you have any kind of meditative practices that you do?
Me, sometimes I like to take a nap and I stay in like a lined position I um where I go into like different places like a forest or a waterfall. That way I could imagine relaxing there and swimming there and not even having like a care in the world.
Interesting. 'Cause, in my previous interview with How About Heathen, which, as I said in the beginning of this podcast, if you haven't already, go subscribe to him because he does incredible videos debunking common misconceptions about the Wicca faith and of course practices of witchcraft. And one of his videos was about shielding for empaths, and in it there's a way to make meditations a bit more easier for people who just started getting into it. It's looking at the clock, like a regular, not a digital clock, but an analog clock, and looking at how the second hand constantly goes down for a full rotation, and you look at that, and then close your eyes and try to visualize that second hand moving up and down until it goes for a full rotation, and that's how you meditate for a minute, and then from a minute to 5, from 5 to 10, from 10 to about 30.
Mhm.
So do you have any particular stories about the Norse mythology that you heavily that heavily interest you? Because I focus on all elements of the Norse mythology.
Yeah, me too. I've always been watching like YouTube videos about the history of Norse mythology and the history of the Norse gods
Mm.
and goddesses, like Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki. Though I haven't gotten into Scotty just yet.
I think Scotty actually married one of the. I think it was one of the Vanir. I.
Mhm.
She might either be Frey's wife or his father's wife, Njord. But I'm pretty sure it's Frey because there's a story of how Frey is looking from his ship, the Skidbladnir, which was created by, I think it's the Sons of Ivaldi who created it, specifically because Loki challenged them to do it. And so he's sitting there in the Skidbladnir, and he's looking beyond, and he sees this female giant that he starts to fall in love with, and then eventually asks for her hand in marriage.
That's very interesting.
I can't really give out the full details unless I actually like read it down and then write a script for it. Because there's also the story of the mead of poetry. Have you heard of that one?
No, I've never heard of that.
Well,
One of my friends, Jordan, has a book about Norse mythology, and it's made by Neil Gaiman.
oh, I have that one as well. Anyway, the story of the mead of poetry is, well, it's just after the Vanir and the Aesir make peace with one another. They all, like, to make the pact complete, they all sort of put their saliva into one little bucket, and out from the spittle comes this new god, and he's a very knowledgeable spirit, a very knowledgeable deity. Everyone loves him. Not like Balder. Balder's a different case, and people love this god, and so this god ends up traveling, and he bumps into these two dwarves, and these dwarves say, "If you're so knowledgeable, then why couldn't you have seen that we were going to kill you?" And he says, he does know, just as he knows that they want his blood for mead, so they can be seen as very poetic. And so they kill him, and the gods are furious at the fact that he's been murdered. But he does come back eventually. And so they make their mead, and they're seeing themselves as these great poets that go, "Ha ha ha, we finally have the mead of poetry. We can understand the universe, and we can sing poems for days." And so eventually one of the dwarves gets murdered by a giant because they needed their payment from that giant. They needed to give payment to that giant, and they're like, "Wait, we can give you the mead of poetry." And he goes, "Oh, can you?" And then they give him the mead of poetry, and the two dwarves end up dying because, well, that's karma. And now this giant has the mead of poetry. Now Odin finds out about this mead of poetry, and Odin wants to get it back. So he goes forward, disguising himself as a giant, and he goes to this giant's daughter and says, "Oh, you're so beautiful. You're so beautiful. It just makes me so sad that I won't be able to sing songs about you because I'm not very poetic." And then she goes in and says, "Okay, you can take a sip." And then he goes in, and then once he sleeps with her, he starts to cry again, and he says, "But the world will never know. The world can never know your beauty." And then she goes, "Fine, you can take another swig of it," only for Odin to drink the entire vat of the mead of poetry, and then turn into a raven and then fly off, which makes this giantess very angry because, well, she had been tricked into someone that she thought she was in love with, and then that pisses off her father too because she was meant to protect the mead of poetry. So her father transforms into a crow to chase after Odin as well, and Odin ends up shitting out some of the mead of poetry onto his face while he's going over to Asgard. And to this day, it is said that if your poetry is terrible, then we know what mead of poetry you have drank from. You have drank in Odin's shit.
Ugh.
The Norse mythology is full of random weird stories like that. Another one of my favorite ones is actually when Thor has to get his hammer back from a giant. You know that one, right?
Mhm.
Where the giant steals Thor's hammer, and he says, "I will only give back Thor's hammer if I can have the mighty hand of Freya in marriage." And so Loki and Thor go over to Freya's house and go, "Hey, we need the hammer back. You got to marry this giant." And she goes in and says, "Are you fucking high?" Like the ground itself begins to shake because of how angry she is, and her two cats, which pull her chariot, start hissing and growling at Loki and Thor for even having the thought of having her marry this giant. And so Thor has to dress up as Freya. Loki has to pretend to be her handmaiden. And they do eventually get the hammer back. Do you have any stories in particular that you just find absolutely amazing in the Norse mythology?
What I find very interesting is is the stories of Thor. Like, um, like there was one story that Thor have actually, um, defeated Loki a couple times,
Oh yeah.
like during battles.
Yeah.
Because, there's a couple of stories of Thor and Loki, having sibling rivalries because, well, maybe it's because of, like, their powers or even, to the power to rule Asgard.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't really say it's a sibling rivalry because Loki isn't Odin's son. Loki is Laufey's son and the blood brother of Odin because they made a blood pact. They then see the greatest thing about the Norse mythology is that it actually feels alive because you study things like Celtic mythology, Greek mythology, or even Egyptian mythology. They just kind of read off as if they are like a history book, so to speak, you know? Because,
Mm-hmm.
you see, in all these other ones, they don't really have a, what's the word? They don't have a Armageddon story in it, but in the Norse mythology, there is an Armageddon. It's Ragnarok. But even then, Ragnarok isn't even seen as, well, the end. Ragnarok is seen as the beginnings of something new. In fact, some people think it's actually a big game of chess that Baldur is playing with some of the other survivors of Ragnarok, and thus the cycle begins anew. In fact,
Mm-hmm.
did you know that in the Norse mythology, the plane of existence that we live on right now, which is Midgar, is
Yeah, I knew
actually
that.
yeah Midgard is actually the skull of a dead giant, and that the stars
Wait, what?
yeah it's we are living on the skull of a dead giant called Ymir, who you know the gods killed to make the world consensually. So the story goes anyway, and the stars we see in the night sky are actually tears from his skull fractures and so on. And in fact, the origin I think the origin of Odin's line comes from the god Bori. And do you know Bori's origin story?
No, I do not, but I have heard of the name before.
Well, you see, the story goes as followed. After Ymir and the giants came to be in between the spaces of Ginnungagap, there was this cow who licked a piece of salt, and from that piece of salt, Bori came to be. He was licked into existence from a cow. Yes, that is an actual thing that happened in the Norse mythology. There was a god out there who was licked into being from a cow.
Ugh.
And then, of course, there's also the story of. Are you aware of the story of Odin's horse, Sleipnir?
Yes. What I have heard is that he has, like, more than 8 hooves.
Well, he has 8 hooves, but do you know how Sleipnir came to be?
Looks like a spider.
No, like Sleipnir's origin story, how he came to be in existence.
Well, well, I know the description of Sleipnir, but I don't know the story.
Well, the story goes as followed: the the gods hired this man, or this man came to the gods to say, "Hey, I can build this wall. I can build your wall for you to prevent the giants from coming in." And so he does that. And Loki says, "Okay, but you only get one season to get this wall complete." And he goes, "I can do that, but I need my horse to carry these bricks for me." And he goes in and says, "Okay, we can carry the bricks for you. Only for the gods to figure out that yes, he is a giant, and he is going to end up getting this wall. He is going to end up getting their wall finished within one season. So Loki comes up with a plan to stop this horse from carrying up the giant's bricks and everything. Loki turns into this chestnut-colored horse to allure this other horse away from the giant. And so Loki and this horse go away for a few days, and the gods don't hear from Loki for a while ever since then. And then Loki comes back with a little foal with 8 legs. So Loki gave birth to a horse. Loki gave birth to Sleipnir. That's his origins.
How the fuck? Like, seriously though, how the fuck is that even possible?
He shapeshifted into a female horse. He shapeshifted into a mare and gave birth to Sleipnir. They did the hanky-panky. That's how.
Oh my god.
See, that's...
Loki, what in the actual hell is wrong with you? I mean...
That's what makes the Norse mythology very interesting. It has so many different weird and wacky stories like that.
Yeah, and sometimes Loki could be like, yeah.
Now, are there any other areas that you want to focus on in this podcast? Because we basically have plenty of time. We've spent about 40 minutes talking about the Norse mythology.
Well, to be honest, I've got nothing left in my brain because sometimes I could be tired as hell.
Yeah. Well, I guess this can be a bit of a shorter podcast. I just need to get I just needed to get something out there today. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you meant, my dude.
Well, until then, I hope this was enjoyable for everyone here, and I will see you all next week. Hopefully I'll have something planned out. This has been Moonlight Madness, and I have been your host, the Moonlight Madman. Is there any ways that people can find your content, Lena?
You can find my YouTube channel, and the link is in the description below, and you have to make sure you subscribe to me, and I will likely produce my content after my online schooling is done, and I will likely be able to see you guys somewhere in this year.
That's been great. Thanks for being a guest on my show. Blessed be everyone.
No problem.
Blessed be
Oh,
everyone.
blessed be.
Blessed be.